you guys? It's Lauryn Friar back with another episode of Session with the Pros. And today we are here with WTTW arts correspondent, Angel Idowu. Angel, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So before we get started, I just wanted to ask you if you could explain to our audience the difference between a correspondent and a journalist or reporter, if there is much of a difference.
I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a difference between being a correspondent and being a reporter. Overall, we have the same duties. I would say that probably the biggest difference is that being an arts correspondent, my beat is very specific. So I'm always doing art coverage versus like maybe I have other friends that are reporters at like 2, 5, 7, and 9, and their beat is a little bit more general. So maybe one day they might be covering something election related or something like CPS related. So I think every day could be a little bit different for them in terms of what they covered. But I would say for me, I'm always doing art. But that's not to say that reporters can't have specific beats. I think that when you look at bigger networks or like bigger, like if you think of like ABC 7 News, you see that you have the DC correspondent or the political correspondent. So I think it's just really an elevated name to what the journalist is covering. But in terms of being a journalist, I think that any journalist is you, is me, is anyone that's covering, that's reporting, that is using any form of storytelling to tell another story. To me, that's how I would identify a journalist.
Okay, so you mentioned having specific beats. So how do you go about finding those stories?
I would say, so it's really helpful for me because like I'm from Chicago, right? Born and raised. I went to high school. I went to like CPS for grammar school, and then I did private Catholic school for high school. And I feel like that allowed me to have a very well-rounded perception of the city. Like growing up in Hyde Park and in Chatham, going to high school in Beverly. So I went to Mother McCauley, but then I went to grammar school in Hyde Park. Like I went to St. Thomas and Ray and Murray, and then finally Mark Sheridan, which is like in Bridgeport. So those are just kind of, it's like all over the city. So I would say probably the biggest way I find stories is just through my personal connections. But then I would say on top of that, going on a lot of like Facebook groups or social media groups. So kind of seeing what people are talking about on Twitter and on TikTok. And a lot of artists have like a lot of art Facebook groups because maybe they want people to come to openings or support their artwork or some form of engagement. And so then when I first started, so I've been at WTTW for, this is my 4th year. When I first started, I was in a lot of art Facebook groups. So I was like keeping a pulse on everything that was happening, every show that was opening that weekend. And so I would go to a lot of them, really getting to know the artist community. And now 4 years later, I think I've developed relationships with a lot of galleries, a lot of artists. So when something is happening, I'll get a text or I'll get an email and people will reach out to me and say, hey, let's do something on this, or do you know about this? And is this something that we could get covered? But then I would say outside of social media and those relationships, just really doing my due diligence of research, of looking at what is happening in the city and just trying to be as engaged as possible. So really kind of like a little bit of everywhere. You know, sometimes my grandma will be like, they was talking about this at the park district today. Like maybe you should do a story on that. Or my mom, she works for an environmental nonprofit, and they'll be like, this is what we were talking about in our meeting today. So it really just kind of varies, I think. Just really listening and figuring out how something can be a story, right? Maybe something is not always a story, but saying, how can I kind of educate and inform the public on something that I'm finding out about that is art related.
That is so cool. You just get to cover art as a job. That is amazing.
No, it's fun. I'm not gonna lie to you. I have a lot of fun this week. So I just did a story that aired last night on this artist, illustrator named Rello. So he has like this exhibition space called Cherry Mountain Arts. And so they just had a group show that was only up for the week. And, you know, he's a part of like Fat Tigers workshop. So just kind of like, that's something that growing up in Chicago, you know about that, right? Everybody knows about Joe Freshgoods. So it's just kind of like tapping into that and paying attention to that and seeing maybe not Joe, but like other people that work with him. But that's really an example of like, a relationship writes on building relationships. So you meet this one person and then that opens a whole window of other people and so on and so forth. So yeah.
Okay, so where does your love for the arts come from? Did you go to college for it? What did you study as a major? How did that happen?
Yeah, I've always loved art. So when I was growing up, I went to, like I said, I went to Mother Macaulay for high school. And so they had a very big musical theater program. So I was involved in that. So I was in plays and musicals for my full high school career during the year. And in the summer, I did like park district plays. And then my mom grew up doing pageants and dancing. So she danced at Mayfair and a couple of other like Black dance companies in Chicago growing up in whatever that was, the 80s, 70s, I don't know. So she did that. And I think that like growing up, we would always watch musicals and just like talk about art and like consumption. And just that was something that we were always bonded in. And then I think as I got older, that was just something that I stuck with. And so when I got to high school, I was doing musical theater, but I was also writing on the newspaper. And then I was also writing for this teen newspaper called The MASH that was with the Tribune at the time, I believe. The Tribune or the Sun-Times, but I'm pretty sure it was the Tribune. And so I was doing that. And then when I got to college, I danced. I also danced in After School Matters. So I was doing that in high school and that in the summer as well. So I was always in musical theater or dancing. And I was in choir. So I think I was just always kind of like loving art. And then yeah, when I went to college, I knew I loved storytelling and I pursued a writing degree. Like my undergrad degree was in political science and with a
Where did you
writing.
go to college?
I went to Beloit College in Beloit, Wisconsin. So it's like 2 hours away. It's a very small school, like less than 2,000 students, but it was great. I loved it. And then that allowed me to kind of like study abroad and explore art in other places of the world. And then I got to like do an internship in Wisconsin and lived in DC for a bit. And then I went to Northwestern for grad school. And that is where I just kind of like took my interest in pursuing broadcast journalism full time or seriously. And so then I did that program and started my career as a journalist right after.
Okay, so now this is just a personal question because I
Yeah.
love musicals and I sing and all of that. What is your favorite musical?
Rent. That is my favorite musical. I love it. I don't remember the first time I saw it, but it really just, when you're like watching something and I always say like the show, I don't know if you know the show on NBC, like This Is Us.
Yeah.
Um, And like I feel like people love that shows because it's like 1 minute you are watching it and then the next second you're crying and you don't really even know why you're crying, but it makes you feel something. And I can remember having that feeling when I first watched Rent. I was just like, wow, I can't really relate to what they're going through because it was like dealing with a lot of like HIV and AIDS and then like struggling artists and living in New York. And the first time I saw it, I think I was like in grammar school. So it was like, I can't relate to any of this, but like I really felt it. And so I think that for me, that is where my love for musical theater and storytelling and performance art, it's all about like the emotion it evokes. And so I think that Rent is the first production I ever saw that made me feel that. So yeah.
I love that. Okay, so you were a producer in Mississippi, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you think that helped with your correspondent position now?
It helped immensely. So right when I graduated from Northwestern, I started there. That was my first job, and I was there for 2 years. And I was initially hired to be a reporter, and I had the experience that a lot of journalists have, which is called like the bait and switch, where they hire you for one thing, and then you get there, you relocate, move your whole life over, and they're like, actually, we need you to do this. And so then I was a producer. And I had no idea what I was doing, but it helped me understand how to be a strong storyteller because it's like there are so many elements that you have to think about when you're presenting a story. story from, like a reporter, you have your voice in the story, right? So you're tracking, that's called a track. So that track matters, like in how the story is presented. So does the visual. So like what video are you using? Do you have interviews? Do you have additional B-roll? And then maybe for me, for arts, because it's kind of lighter, I often incorporate additional music. Now, when it's news, I don't do music. But I will say that being a producer helped me understand how to tell a story fully because I was producing essentially, I think it was like two newscasts every evening. So I think it was the 9 and 10 or 10 and 11. No, 9 and 10. And so then I had to learn, okay, you starting the show with this. How do you even get people engaged when they come into the show? Like, hey, I worked at WJTV. You're watching WJTV at 10. Here's why you need to watch us instead of 2, 5, 7, or 9, right? So thinking about that, how can I pull people in? How can I keep them engaged and interested the full 30 minutes? So I think that really helped me understand how to be a great storyteller. And then while I was producing, I started reporting on the weekends. So I was like producing 5 days a week. And then on my off days, I was like working half days, some full days, and reporting on the weekends. And so that taught me how to balance and how to move quickly and tell my stories quickly, but still effectively. It taught me how to kind of like be organized and like manage what I'm doing. And then when I got to this position, I was able to carry everything I learned there into my position currently. The same organization, the same storytelling, the same figuring out how to draw people in, all of those details I just kind of carried over with me.
Okay. So I had a question about how you were finding these producing jobs and internships. Are
Mhm.
you networking with people, or I saw you also had like art with Angel, and I thought that
Yeah.
was really cute. Like,
Oh, thank you.
how did you go about doing that? Like finding your way into these rooms and finding these positions?
I think a big part is NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists. So that is something that you can be engaged with as early as high school. I personally wasn't. I think that it's a very big, this is just my personal opinion, like my personal perspective. But I think for me at the time when I was in high school, I was very like NABJ is huge, right? So they have chapters in every major city, even small cities. We have a national convention every year in a big city. We have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of members. And I might be exaggerating on a couple thousands, but there are a lot of us. And I think that when I was in high school, I wasn't comfortable. I just wasn't ready to be in that setting of so many people. But then when I got to college, I found a support group of other Black women that were pursuing careers in broadcast journalism. And together as a group, I think one of them had been active in it like in her college because like they had a really big college chapter, like a student chapter NABJ at her school. She went to North Carolina A&T, but like at Beloit, where it's 1,200 people and no Black people, of course there's no NABJ there. So it was when I got into college and she kind of introduced to all of us a softer side to NABJ that I felt more comfortable engaging. And the second I did that, I made friends with other journalists. I was very active and engaged in like the journalist community. And then just naturally from that, it's kind of the same thing, like I said, of when I was in those art Facebook groups and I would meet a couple of artists. And then once I met a couple of them, then I kind of knew what was going on with all of them. So it was just kind of like really just networking. I think NABJ is like invaluable resource. They're so great. They're so helpful. And I think the key though with networking though is to be genuine. So like I didn't join NABJ and I was like, hey, I need a job. It was very much like, hey, what are you doing? Hey, I need help with this. Would you mind looking at my reel? What do you think about that? It was very much like this conversation that you and I are having of like, how do I do this? I need help. Can you be my mentor? And so it was just like a lot of that and figuring it out for several. So I was in my grad school for a year. So it was like a year of that. And then I got my first job like right after. So it was like a year or so of doing that. But then in terms of like how I found the jobs, it was like through talking with them, I learned that a lot of TV stations are owned by specific companies. So there's Nexstar, there's Tegna, there's Hearst, and these are major companies that own TV stations around the country. So when you're applying for jobs at TV stations around the country, you're applying directly to these companies. So that's how I ended up getting my first job, actually, is someone that was in NABJ that had also went to Northwestern, that like previously before me, she worked at the TV station in Mississippi, and they were looking for a producer. And she posted it on like a Northwestern alumni group or an NABJ alumni group or something. And I just was like, I was in this, when you're hiring for like thousands of jobs a day. And I was just like, oh, okay, added it to the list, just like sent my resume, didn't even think about it, kept applying. And then I got the job. And so that is really just kind of what I did, of just kind of like networking, being very active and engaged, talking with people, trying to put myself out there as best as I could. I think when I was younger, it was very hard for me too. But as I got older and I found a support group of other Black women specifically, for me, this is all specific to me, like everyone's different, but these are things that helped me. And once I felt comfortable, then I was able to put myself out there and kind of get something back. So, yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned being genuine when you're networking, but you also said at the beginning you're a little bit uncomfortable. Do you have any tips for people watching that might be, they want to get out there, but they're not so sure yet, how they can just start networking?
I would say the biggest thing is being yourself. I think being in this industry, we feel like, and at some points we may be encouraged to be a different version of ourselves, a more poised version of ourselves, a more professional, right? So many different things that we could be, right? And I would say just being yourself is the most important, and also understanding that when you're networking, you are forming relationships, and relationships are not one-sided. So it's like, if I want a mentor, that's great, but like, what am I like? So they're helping me, but like, what am I adding to this relationship? So it's like, you can't really fake that. You can't really fake how you engage with someone. So it's like being genuine is really important. So let's say you're out at a baseball game and you meet a Black woman that is kind of doing something that you're interested in, and you naturally hit it off, right? The energy is just good. You're smiling, you're kikiing, you're like, oh my gosh, she's great. Like, I love this. And then you're just like, hey, can I get your number? I would love to keep talking with you. I would love to get coffee and get some feedback from you. And then as you build that relationship, you learn how you can also pour into the relationship so that they are getting something out of it as well. Now, granted, it'll be a little bit different because it's like mentor mentee, but it's like you still have to think about that. And I feel like it's easier to give to someone that you want to give to versus someone you think you have to give to. So it's like, if you try to network with, let me think. If you try to network with, like, I'm just saying a random person like Val Warner at ABC7, right? Because she's up, right? She's on ABC7. Everybody loves her. She's popular. Already in the back of her mind, she's probably thinking, is someone trying to get something out of me, right? So then it's just like, that's why being genuine is so important, because that genuineness is felt both ways. So just like you feel like a connection to this person, they feel that connection to you. And I think just kind of going with that. But the key is to like put yourself out there. So engage as much as you can. If you're feeling uncomfortable or you're feeling nervous, go to an event, but maybe go for 20 minutes and say, I'm just going to stay for 20 minutes and I'm going to talk to 2 people. I'm going to give out 5 business cards. And maybe you don't really get anything out of that, but that is really how you start to foster a community. It's kind of like you really have to put yourself out there, because people aren't even going to know who you are if you are not present, if you're not active. And you also just kind of have to find a support group, maybe find a girlfriend to go with you, or maybe have a girlfriend that meet you after, right? Something that encourages you to go. Just like all little things, I think with anything, like maybe if we like a guy and we don't know how to talk to them. Just like, how do you kind of ease your way in and make yourself feel comfortable? I think is really the biggest thing. But just going off that genuine, honest vibe, to me, that's what works the best because you're going to get the best feedback. You're going to develop the best relationships, and they're going to be filling, right? Because sometimes you can have relationships with people and they're just kind of like transactional and you don't really get anything out of that except the transaction. And I don't think that that's what it should be. But that's just my personal thought.
I love you. Okay. All right. So you've covered so many stories and you've met so many amazing people. What would you say has been your favorite story to cover or your most interesting encounter?
I've like interviewed so many different types of artists. So like every time people ask me this is probably the hardest question. But I will say, no, I don't really think I have a favorite, to be honest. I think each experience is different, but I will say I just did an interview recently with Chicago House DJ and who's a part of the Chosen Few, Terry Hunter, and it was just so cool to talk with him because he's such a great storyteller, right? He's been making music, he's been traveling for so much of his life. He's a Black man from Chicago, so he's like real, like it was very authentic, it was very genuine. It was not like, hello, I'm Terry Hunter. It was like, hey, what's up? I'm Terry Hunter. So it was like, I love that. And when we were talking, like we did the interview, and my interviews typically are like 15 minutes. And I ended up staying, like I interviewed him at his house. I ended up staying and talking with him and his wife for probably another hour after that, just about life. And I loved that because it was very genuine. It was very real. It was a continuation of the conversation that we had initially had on camera, but just real. And that kind of goes back to the genuineness and just kind of like riding that wave. And I just really loved it because I learned so much from him. He was like so passionate about his craft, and it really encouraged and inspired me. And I love a person that can tell a good story, and I love traveling. And so it was just all kind of like things that I really enjoyed. Yeah. So that was fun. I know that's probably not the most interesting, but that's something that stands out to me.
All right, so we talked about storytelling. I wanted to talk about the piece you just worked with Isaiah Washington on promoting his new film Corsicana. And when I saw the trailer, I was very captivated. It was really nice to see a Black male lead from so long ago, and he's wealthy and he's educated, and it's so action-packed. And I feel like oftentimes, the Black films, they can be kind of down, but I think it came from a different place, and I really like that. So what would you say? Why would you say, excuse me, Black representation is important in the media?
It's important because, and it's so funny because the interview I literally just did with Rello and Tremont Arts, I just aired last night, he said it exactly right. He was like, we as Black people, we know what it's like to be Black. We know how we want to be treated because we live with it and experience it every day. So it's up to the rest of the world through our media to kind of learn that, right? We can't have other people telling our stories. We have to tell our stories, but that doesn't mean that our stories are specifically for us. A lot of the times, all the time, I think our stories should be to educate and help people understand who we are and why our representation is important. So I think that when you have people like me or like Rello or like Isaiah Washington or Terry Hunter, you are showing the public outside of the Black community, this is what it's like to be Black. There's not one version of being Black. There's not one type, not one anything, and educating. And I think that art is a great way to do that because it's a very non-abrasive. It's not really judgmental. It's kind of like easy to digest. It's a very safe space. I think when you're pushing people outside of their comfort zones, they don't want to feel pressured or overwhelmed. And so I feel like art is really, for me, I have found this a very great space to navigate difficult conversations because to me, and this is what makes my job so fun, I say that art is any form of self-expression. So that's why I do absolutely everything. I'm about to interview this girl who just started her own like hair care line, right? So she's doing the like wax sticks to keep your flyaways down. Like she's making edge control. She just started doing this during the pandemic and she's from Chicago. And to me, that's art because it's like you saw a niche and you wanted to create something and you get a relief from doing this, right? This makes you feel better about yourself. You get home, or not better about yourself, but like makes you feel better. So you get home from work, you get to do this exercise that is like releasing and it's self-expressive and it helps people understand you in a different way. And then through that, you're educating people on Black hair care, how to start your own business. There's so many stories within that story of you just creating something for yourself. It's kind of like when like therapists or like people say, sharing your story helps other people because it reminds them that they're not alone. Right. So maybe if you were sad about something and I told you I just had the same thing and this is how I handled it, you could be like, oh, okay. I may not handle it this way, but it's good to know that like there are other people going through the same thing and that's helping me figure out how to get through a situation. And I think that when you have um Black representation in media, it normalizes, the phrase normalizes Blackness is weird, but it creates a safer space for a conversation, if that makes sense, because you're letting people know that this is something like we're all going through, whether we be Black, white, Asian, or whatever. And I think that just allowing that space helps people understand more. I don't know if I explained that well. That was a very long answer. I'm sorry.
Okay, so we're getting close to wrapping up. So I want to ask, what are 3 pieces of advice that you will offer a young person that's trying to go into journalism or broadcasting?
I would say definitely stay true to yourself. You're going to hear a lot of people tell you to be different versions of yourself, and that's going to be no matter what, whether you do print or broadcast, radio, any audio, anything. Every boss is going to be different. You look at 2, 5, 7, and 9, and 11, every broadcast is different. Every show has their own style. Every boss has an idea of how they want to tell the story, because at the end of the day, they're also all storytellers too, right? So everyone's different. So they're going to always want you to tell the story based on like how they tell the story. But as long as you stay true to who you are and what you want to do, then you're never going to be kind of veered off by like all these different narratives of like who people want you to be. Like my last boss is so different from my current boss, right? So now it's like, if I had listened to my last boss about who I should be and how I should present myself, then I wouldn't have been myself. And then my new boss wouldn't have liked that because they're different. So I think that you just have to stay in tune with yourself. And then in doing that, having a support system. I think having a support system as a journalist is really important because this industry is also very competitive. And a lot of us are applying for the same jobs and we're going after the same jobs. And you need to have a support system that is encouraging and uplifting you and reminding you of who you are and why you're capable. And it's okay if you and your friend go after the same job, but you just need to know that that's a real friend and not like a competitive friend. So yeah, I would say staying true to yourself, having a support system, and I think also always pushing the envelope and thinking about how you can do something different or stand out while continuing to do the work. Doing the work is really important. Being a journalist is not about being on TV and like being popular and being social and like becoming famous. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to tell stories. We're here to engage and to educate. And it does have those lighter and more fun moments, don't get me wrong, but I think that doing the work is really important. Like you actually have to do the work. So it's like right now I have a voice coach and I just got a voice coach, but I'm like, I have a great voice. I don't need a voice coach. Like, no, I need to improve my craft. So you need to constantly be, maybe do a writing exercise, maybe like write your package, but you don't like how it went, write it a different way. Always try to get better because this is a big industry. It's always someone trying to get your job. It's always someone checking you, comparing, blah, 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 trying to take it. So it's like you have to stay on top. But staying true to yourself in that and not comparing yourself also. That's why staying true to yourself is important, because it's easy to compare yourself in an industry that's so competitive, where we are all basically being told the same thing, right? Be professional, be presentable, have your hair like this, wear this type of dress. This is how you want to tell the story. We're all kind of being told the same thing. So it's like, if you stay true to yourself, you have that support system and you're doing the work, then you won't be derailed by the other things that are maybe potentially causing you stress, right? In any job.
Okay, that was already a lot, but I have to ask, is there anything else that you like to add before we wrap up?
No, I think so. I think, like I said, support system, staying true to yourself and doing the work, and I think you'll be good. Do whatever you do that makes you happy and continue to surround yourself with people that love you and continue to remind yourself why you're doing it and why you love it. And if you don't love it, maybe it's time for you to do something else. And that's also okay. Like, we have our whole lives. So if maybe you pursue it and you realize you don't like it, that's really okay. And maybe you can do storytelling in a different way. Like, I started in print and now I'm in broadcast, but now I'm looking at broadcast and I'm looking at podcasts. So it's like, you never know. Just really staying true to yourself and making sure you're doing what's best for you and being happy. And then everything will come, honestly.
Okay, thank you so much. Before we
No
close
problem.
out, where can we find you on social media?
Art with Angel on everything: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Art with Angel.
All right, well, that's it for you guys. This is Session with the Pros. I can't talk today. All right, thank you so much, Miss Ito, for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was great.